Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street and managing editor of the News Doctors and independent financial journalist Eric Dubin. Welcome back to another Welcome to Dystopia podcast. This is episode number 25. Eric, I want to talk about the gold and silver markets. You know, we've had a little bit of a correction, but there seems to be pretty strong support in gold and silver. Do you think then that the support levels for gold and silver are also pretty strong?
No, absolutely. We've already bounced off of that 1920 that we had back on the Thursday. We're recording this Thursday, July 28th, and a week ago we had that jump off of the trampoline of 1920. People are wanting to get into the market. They see this as a longer-term bull market, and in particular, even though we have a lot of interest amongst people accumulating paper positions on the COMEX, it still is giving a bid to the market and helping push up precious metals. So, you know, we're going to see much higher prices as the year unfolds, and we're already moving higher again, trying to retake that. We made a run for the 22 level on silver and gold at 1400, and we're going to, in the days ahead, in the early part of August, we're going to exceed those levels.
Yeah, and the global economy, the fundamentals of the global economy getting worse, I think, is definitely good for gold and silver, and also negative interest rates are good for gold. Now, Eric, we did see the numbers come out with the Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawal numbers for the first half of 2016. Cruz Jansen put them out if our listeners want to go read his article. I think he says 972 tons were withdrawn from the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It's a lower number. Why do you think that? Do you think it has to do with there's physical supply problems for gold in tonnage? Do you think there's more competition from other sources besides China buying? Why do you think that number is lower than other past years?
Well, it's lower in part because there has been a small slowdown in the amount of purchases in China because of the higher prices. But the whole focus on the Shanghai exchange withdrawals is understating how much gold is still being consumed in China. There's a lot more that are coming in from the Hong Kong window. You know, we've had an uptick on that. We have no idea how much comes in unofficially when it comes to smuggling, even into China. I've seen estimates that range in excess of 200 metric tons on an annual basis, just flowing out of Central Asia and moving into China. And the domestic mine supply is 400 metric tons every year. All of that hasn't gone away, even though if you look at Bloomberg or CNBC news coverage, they, in the last 60 days, give or take, have been jumping up and down about that small slowdown that we saw in China. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't amount to that much. There's a lot more that is being consumed that isn't being officially documented. And the trend, most importantly, has reverted back to China really accelerating in their accumulation. And when you add on top of that the fact that India has been purchasing less in this year and is now about to face the need to restock for their important holiday and jewelry season, we're going to see a lot more purchasing of physical gold in a tight market and much higher prices as the year unfolds.
Yeah, and to add to your points there, I read the Jim Rickards book, not his newest one, The New Case for Gold, but the one before that, the one in between Currency Wars and New Case for Gold. The name of it is escaping me currently. I don't have it written down. But I think Jim Rickards mentioned in that book, you know, his sources said that the Chinese military was secretly bringing in 500 metric tons of physical gold, either from Australia and the Perth Mint in orders or from the LBMA. They were, escorting it in tanks across the borders. So there are stories out there with credible sources. We also know from people who have visited Swiss refiners, not tiny little Swiss refiners, some of the largest ones in the world that refine gold and recast it from old bars into, 1 kilogram, 4/9, 0.999 bars, and send them into China. We know that they're having problems sourcing physical gold in tonnage to recast those back into bars to send to China, and they're running their refineries, 24/7, 365, and it's still not satiating the demand for China. Yeah. So even with the decreased numbers in Shanghai Gold Exchange, I've still heard recently stories from the Swiss gold refiners that they still get requests to ship them more bars to China.
Yeah, the 500 metric tons figure that you're referring to was something that included the domestic production that is chaperoned by the military. So it's not that high. I think it's more in the neighborhood of probably around 200 metric tons, and that's probably coming out of Central Asia for the most part. Afghanistan's got a lot of artisanal miners that are creating God knows how much, maybe as much as 50 metric tons. It's quite a bit. So they're all told, there's a lot of physical gold that's being vacuumed up and moving eastward as the wealth. There's an old saying that where wealth moves, so does gold purchasing, and that's what we're seeing.
Exactly, and there's also more competition for the physical gold. Now there's pension funds, there's insurance companies. It makes gold more attractive with negative interest rates, zero from gold, but large potential capital gains increases is better than a bond paying negative interest rates. The Jim Rickards book that I was going to mention is called The Death of Money. I just looked it up, The Coming Collapse. That's his second book. That's also very good. All three of his books are very good for our listeners out there who want to go read Currency Wars, The Death of Money, and The New Case for Gold. I think, the gold market, it's looking very interesting, Eric, from the point that there's just so much more competition. Now that the gold chart is good, we're going to start seeing people that maybe didn't have any exposure to physical gold or gold stocks at all. They're going to start accumulating positions in physical gold and gold stocks on dips. The money just won't go into, the gold ETFs like GLD.
And the great thing about this bull market as it stands right now is that for the most part, the majority of people hate gold and hate silver. We're probably only in the second inning of a 9-inning game here, if not with extended innings. So it's going to be an interesting ride and have a heck of a lot more to go. We will definitely take out the old highs, probably with ease within the early 2017 time frame, frankly, and even silver at 50, I think. Sometime mid-2017 is just a given. There's not a lot of physical out there, and we're going to see mine supply shrink in the years going forward because of the duration of this bear market and the damage that it did to the industry. And people are coming to terms with that. We're beginning to see even the GFMSs of the world and the World Gold Council speak about this now. So the damage is done and the prices have to move higher to repair what has happened in this industry. That combined with just the insanity of the financialization of darn near everything and the continuation of central bankers going wild. And, that brings us to this week and what's going on. We have the Bank of Japan meeting tomorrow. And they're probably going to announce stimulus that's going to come in a little bit under the expectations that were seeded into the marketplace as early as 2 weeks ago, with all of the kerfuffle of Ben Bernanke coming over to Japan and talking about how they need to do flat-out helicopter drops of money to re-stimulate and so forth. So in the very near term, that's probably going to put a little bit more pressure on equity markets just because of the lack of the crack coming to the market to keep the traders happy and elevate asset prices higher. Longer term, there's going to be no let-up. The Bank of Japan is stuck, and they're going to continue on with this never-ending stimulus and diluting away of the purchasing power of the yen.
And I think the PhD economists at the Bank of Japan, these academics, a lot of them who have never had a real job, these Keynesians, I think they're starting to realize that no matter what they do, they're pretty much screwed. I think they're finally coming to that conclusion. We've heard stories from former Federal Reserve members who used to work there 15, 20 years ago saying, what are you guys at these central banks doing? You're just stupid academics with bad theories. You're just doing classroom stuff. You don't know what you're doing. It's just amazing, though, to track the PR statements that the Bank of Japan put out. At first, it was, 10 trillion yen program. And then on Zero Hedge reported only a couple days after that, they were going to do 20 trillion yen. And then only a few days after that, they weren't going to do it at all. And so now they're back. I think the story you sent me today, Eric, from Zero Hedge says it might be maybe 10 trillion is spent, but that's kind of already priced in. And then, if that's already priced in and the number underwhelms, like you says, these guys that are still doing the yen carry trade, God knows what they're going to do to the asset prices. But there was a great zero hedge story. I did a video on this a few days ago, and it's about the total amount of collective quantitative easing that different central banks are total putting into the markets right now, asset prices. We're at 180 billion and counting per month, Eric, when you convert all those different currencies, whether it's the ECB, European Central Bank, doing their 80 billion euros per month asset purchase program, or the Bank of Japan, and then the Federal Reserve also reinvesting any interest payments they get on their U.S. Treasury holdings into buying more assets. We're at over 180 billions per month. Isn't this crazy?
And I put that in perspective. When the Federal Reserve had its QE2 program going, we were doing 45 billion for mortgage-backed securities purchases and 40 billion for treasuries. I think maybe I got that flipped. I think it was the other way around. But 85 billion total on a monthly basis. And supposedly now, everybody thinks, oh, well, the Federal Reserve isn't doing any monetization and not doing any QE, but we're rolling over the interest that comes due with bonds that mature and reinvest that into new bonds. So it's a monumental amount of money.
Yep, Eric. And to add to your points there, that zero hedge article that it shows the balance sheets on the chart. We'll put a link to it for our listeners to check out the charts of the central bank's balance sheets. And they're not even counting the rolling over of interest, like you said. So they have the Federal Reserve's balance sheet at $4 trillion. And the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, I don't see the likelihood of it decreasing anytime soon. I see the likelihood of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet increasing going forward because I don't think they're going to be able to sell their assets. There's not a lot of people who are going to want to buy the bonds from the Federal Reserve.
When you look at the markets right now, if you look at the S&P 500, it's like this suspended animation moment of a Wile E. Coyote on the edge of a cliff with nothing below, and it's amazing how we've seen the VIX completely collapse. The amount of volatility that was pulled out of the market after the Brexit, towards the tail end of June, we had this market spasm, and then all of a sudden, only a month later, the markets are like as placid as they possibly could be painted. It's one of the most artificial moves I've ever seen in my entire life. And it doesn't bode well for later this year. Once we get through this election, and it's amazing that we have been able to get through the conventions without more violence and more of a catfight on both conventions. But amazingly, volatility there has also been tapered down, I should say. Everything is an illusion.
It is, but as long as they keep the asset prices high and the regular Americans who aren't woken up, their 401ks are doing well, that people check each day, and their housing prices are either staying flat and not dropping and maybe going up a little bit, people are pretty happy. I still see on Facebook, non-libertarian people are not questioning the system. They think that Hillary didn't do any of these bad things. They didn't see the Clinton Cash documentary. You did bring up the VIX. That's a very important thing. Dave Kranzler, our buddy, who will be on the show, who will be on a regular Wall Street for Main Street interview again soon, he was talking about the VIX being manipulated. I think there are certain, industries and certain companies that the Plunge Protection Team, Exchange Stabilization Fund, whoever's involved in this, the powers that be, I think they want to protect. We were talking, Eric, in conversations last week or the week before about manipulation in bank stocks. Remember that V-shaped turnaround in the Deutsche Bank share price when it was crashing? I mean, normally you're really good with technical analysis, but normally that type of chart damage, Eric, that takes, weeks. It takes, in a regular non-manipulated market, that type of crash in a stock, that'll take weeks or months before a trader will be willing to catch a falling knife and come in there, especially unless the trader is a not-for-profit guy and not trading with his own money.
Yeah. Well, even with Deutsche Bank, they've only been able to keep it within a range of less than $14.50, give or take, and $12.50, and that's with a concerted effort of the powers that be to buy the heck out of the shares and support them. That day of the Brexit vote saw a gigantic amount of purchasing of Deutsche Bank's American depository receipts once the London exchange was closed. The vote was out, and all the ramifications started spilling through global markets. You could see it, and that was one of the reasons why, amongst other things, we've been seeing the actual plunge protection team in action that I made that call that they were going to be able to put the fire out of the Brexit inspired financial crash that was rolling over the markets on that Friday, and it worked. If you look at a chart, in fact, I recommend our listeners do that. Go to stockcharts.com or some other place where you can pull up a chart of the VIX and just look at it. What's really interesting about the VIX is that it was in a tight trading range in the months before the Brexit, and then we had the Brexit and the market spasm, and then with all of the what was easily 50 billion, if not a heck of a lot more, of currency swaps and so forth. I mean, I know that Jason, you've been quoting the 250 billion pound press release that the Bank of England had put out, but that was only a pledge. They didn't actually declare exactly what they put out, so we don't even know. And these efforts turned the VIX into something that's now horizontal, but at a lower level of volatility than even before the Brexit. And when you look at that at the chart and you understand what the VIX is representing, that I've never seen happen before, ever. the kind of efforts that have been put in place to, as quickly as the markets have been saved, are monumental. This is much faster in terms of being able to put out fires than what we've seen even in 2008 to 2009, or the spasm of last summer, or any other time you want to point to in the last decade. The manipulators, the powers that be, have gotten darn good at what they're doing. But this level of complacency that's in the market as well is something that is something to behold, and it's going to break later this year. This is a level of unnatural complacency that just can't maintain itself going forward, given all the rollover of corporate profits and the rollover of the economy. So I'm expecting us to have a pretty tough time in the fall with a stock market correction in excess of 10%.
Yeah, we're going to have monetary erectile dysfunction soon. These central bankers.
They've been abusing the Viagra to a monumental level.
Well, yeah, you can only pop so much Viagra or cocaine before you get a heart attack and die. But they're really attempting, Eric, to do this asset price hyperinflation. I mean, they're okay with the inflation as long as most of the inflation they create goes into the asset prices. That's the way it seems to me.
And that's what we're seeing now, more so in the markets and what's being displayed with market prices. That's what the tape is telling us. But what's really interesting, instead of seeing a heck of a lot of movement to the upside, we're just seeing mostly at this stage horizontal movement, tampering down of volatility, and this kind of like Wile E. Coyote cliff hang moment I spoke of before. And that just creeps me out, to get a very sophisticated term on you guys. I mean, this is weird. And
well, Eric,
I would badly later this year.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to end badly at some point. Trying to get the exact timing on it's going to be very difficult. We know, hedge fund managers with track records of shorting like Jim Chanos and Kevin Duffy, who was also on the show. They're slowly accumulating short positions. They're not trying to time things too perfectly. Kevin Duffy, I think, was buying puts, he told me, on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and bad banks. 2003, 2004, he started building positions. Sure. He would add a little bit each time. And, eventually he would be proven right. But the timing of these things is going to be very difficult. This disconnect that you're talking about, Eric, with asset prices and certain manipulation of key companies, key industries, key indicators like the VIX, this doesn't jive with what we're seeing in the real economy. We're seeing articles on Zero Hedge and elsewhere about how Americans are going out to eat way less. The total amount, 5% less people going out to eat, total customers, than even 3 years ago. When you're talking about tens of billions of dollars that American spends going out to eat, that's a really, really large number. So I think, a lot of these individual companies, I don't think the Federal Reserve is, or the plunge protection team is going to protect a lot of these restaurants where the customers are just not going out to eat, or the average check size drops, or their profit margins are being squeezed with higher labor costs and inflation on their food prices and things like that.
Well, they're not even conceptually thinking in those terms. They're all focused on the wealth effect and raising assets as some kind of a means to, spill over with trickle-down economic theories.
Yeah, and this is why from a shorting perspective, Eric, I think it's dangerous for a lot of people to start shorting, large indices like the Dow or the S&P 500 and things like that. I don't think, if you are going to short this market, I don't know if that's the best positions to short in. I think, this is a stock pickers shorting market of individual companies with bad balance sheets that, even if there is manipulation of stock markets, the companies, the fundamentals of the companies will be so bad that there's no way investors will be able to buy them.
Or to target sub sectors like retail, for example, is a lot easier to short without having to fight the Fed or the plunge protection team elevating a broad index like an S&P 500.
Exactly. So, Eric, I want to talk about the current events that are coming up either this week or stories I saw for the rest of the show before we get to the Scumbag Nominees. We're just going to go through some of these stories pretty quickly for our listeners out there, stories that caught my eye and Eric's eye. So we have the European bank stress test coming up on Friday. One of the zero hedge stories was the Italian bank. One of the Italian banks needed $5 billion of emergency capital raises just to try and make it look like it could pass the stress test.
Well, it's actually that they know that they're not going to pass the stress test, and they want to have that buffer announced in advance so that people don't get all nervous about their capitalization going up in smoke.
Yeah, fair enough. I wonder what they're going to say on Deutsche Bank, personally, because Deutsche Bank is this giant, large black hole that could potentially suck all the other banks in with counterparty risk and things like that. So I'm wondering what they're going to say about the different banks. Obviously, I think they're going to lower the bar. They're claiming that these are going to be very stringent stress tests. Well, I doubt they're going to have scenarios where the earnings go to zero, drop 100%, or the asset prices that the bank is holding drop 50% or more in only a year or two. I doubt they're going to run those type of scenarios.
And Deutsche Bank definitely wants a bailout of one form or another because they're on the hook for the Italian debt. They're one of the biggest lenders. So it's quite a systemic risk scenario going on. But in the final analysis, they're going to bail out the Italian banks one way or another. They just have to come up with an agreement that all parties will find acceptable. And they're not going to do bail-ins with the exception of something that could be just, small and helpful to selling the package of a bailout. They don't want to screw over depositors on a wholesale basis because politically they'll be untenable, and there are a lot of Italian retail households that own a lot of that debt. So I don't think we're going to see bail-ins across the board as much as people may have suspected, even as little as a year ago. But one way or another, they're going to deal with this, and I don't think it's going to cause a systemic spillover because the size of the Italian debt in question is something that they can nationalize. It's not so large to be untenable, and they'll be able to kick the can down the road, but not for very long.
Eric, I think the large bail-ins could potentially bring out the pitchforks. Catherine Austin Fitts calls this a slow burn, which is what the people in power prefer. I call this stagflate and lie. It's a very sophisticated form of control with inflation and taxes where they get you 6 to 12% per year, and they just death by 1,000 cuts. So 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to have a lot less in assets. Your purchasing power is going to be a lot less. They're going to layer on a new 1% tax here on your gasoline, a new 2% tax there on every time you go to the grocery store. This seems to be the preferred method of control with inflation and taxes going forward. Now, I want to talk about Deutsche Bank also. They bombed earnings. So that's no surprise. I mean, we saw that coming a while away. Some of the other stories, though, that I think our listeners should be aware of, Larry Summers just did an interview. It was in Fortune magazine. You can go to the website. He was talking about, and normally, the people at the Federal Reserve, the people at the U.S. Treasury Department, he has their ear. So Larry Summers is like an important thought leader for a PhD economist. They consider him, one of the smartest, brightest guys in the room. Even though he's been, proven wrong and wrong again all these times, but people still listen to him. But he's suggesting that the U.S. should spend $2 trillion in infrastructure. We've seen Donald Trump say something along those lines. If he's elected, he wants to spend a lot more money on infrastructure. I'm sure Hillary, since Bill Clinton and her friend Robert Rubin were such good buddies with Larry Summers, they'd be interested in that as well.
that's the plan. Then they're going to do a global infrastructure drive. It's going to be something they're going to try to coordinate with the central banks across the board and governments.
Well, that's going to be very inflationary, Eric. That's going to be, very inflationary compared to maybe like Bretton Woods or initially, and implementing the euro, how inflationary that was. Or if they do go to a one world digital currency or currency blocks that are digital currency, that would be just layers of inflation on top of layers of inflation on top of layers of inflation. So they would just basically start reflating the system like crazy and start over. Other stories that I saw that interested me, there was this interesting piece that Lawrence Kotlikoff wrote for Forbes magazine. For those of you not familiar with Lawrence Kotlikoff, he's a PhD economist. He's a Democrat. He's worked for as the advisor, I think, for presidents Bill Clinton and Obama and those guys. But he's gotten his numbers checked for unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. He says that number's over $200 trillion in net present value of unfunded liabilities using GAAP accounting. So the $19 trillion debt that we have now, that's almost $20 trillion that Obama has doubled to this number in his administration. He says that number's not right. His new article, though, Eric, is talking about a $6 trillion deficit in the last 12 months that Social Security just ran. And what he says is going to have to happen, and this is, we've been talking about this for our listeners to prepare for something like this, is that the Social Security payroll tax in the near future will have to increase 32% right away almost to make up for the fact that Social Security is running larger and faster deficits than they thought it would. So if you are going to have a lot less take-home pay out there, if you're an employee, you're going to have to learn a new skill, or you're going to have to add a side business. You're going to have to be creative to figure out ways to replace that income that the Social Security tax is going to be increasing and taking away from your take-home pay.
Yeah. Anybody that's a millennial generation can basically assume that, and should operate on the assumption that Social Security is not going to be there for them. I mean, there will be means tested, and if anybody has ability to get middle class lifestyle and above, there will be no Social Security for those individuals. And
yep, it's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, think about it. They need more and more younger, able-bodied, young adult men and women to come into the workforce and be employees and pay into the system and pay higher and higher taxes. So the baby boomer generation has the money that they need to, cover their health care and things like that. Obviously it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I think the way the scheme works is that it's basically a Ponzi scheme. I mean, look at the first couple of people that received the Social Security check, right? I think the first woman who got a Social Security check, she didn't put any money in, and FDR gave her like a big, humongous check of like $100,000 or something.
I'm not familiar with that history. But
yeah,
we have a demographic problem in the sense that the millennial generation is gigantic in size, and coming behind them is a generation that has got less economic opportunities and smaller in size, and that's turning the whole system upside down, and it's already insolvent as it is. So it's a clusterfuck.
Yep. And there's so many different Ponzi schemes. The debt-based fiat currencies is a Ponzi scheme. Fractional reserve banking is a Ponzi scheme. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. There's a lot of Ponzi schemes right now. But, if we're on CNBC or Bloomberg, we can't call it that because they either won't let us on in the first place or they'll never let us back on again.
Have you go and make the coffee?
I don't even think they would do that. Considering one of the guys that was an assistant producer for CNBC for a while, he was one of the main founders of Zero Hedge, and he was leaking like a lot of the stories that left. So I think they're aware of like some of the. Obviously, there's been outings of the Zero Hedge guys, but some of the people that also founded Zero Hedge years ago, they've left, and they weren't those assistant producers at CNBC and Bloomberg that would see the stories about manipulation and that there was a housing crisis coming, and that the mainstream media totally ignored it, and they just got fed up, and they created the Zero Hedge website to get that information out. Well, I have a few more stories here before we get to the scumbag nominees. We have a White House report, Eric, saying that student loan debt is still good for the economy long term. But now when you hear the stuff coming from Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, they're talking about how bad student loan debt is. We had the Wall Street Journal article out, I think about 4 or 5 months ago, that actually said more than 40% of all student loan debts are in default.
Mm-hmm.
So people are either can't make their payments, they've asked for an extension, or they're totally, haven't paid for the last year or two. So I think it's just pure economic propaganda from the Obama administration. Obviously, there's some degrees maybe that you can go to school. If you got into Harvard and you got a scholarship, maybe to George Washington University or Georgetown or something like that, and they're going to pay your way, and you're going to learn a valuable skill like engineering or computer science or something, then, maybe college is still good. But for a lot of people's majors, you can learn the skills without the student loan debt and partying and things like that. And my days as a college student, I didn't exactly spend all my. Huh?
He says with a guilty laugh.
I do. I didn't even actually. I didn't even make it to class 50% of the time. But I still got just under a 3.0 GPA. I got 2.9. So I was getting A's and B's in most of my classes. I was reading the books and stuff. I just didn't like going to the lectures. I was going out partying and stuff. But then again, I kind of made up for the fact that I didn't have a social life in high school because of complicated things going on in my life, and my family moved across the country right before my senior year of high school. So I kind of let it all out of my system in college. Anyways, though, let's get back to the last couple stories we have before the Scumbag Nominee section. We're doing our best to get the show in under an hour. So we have the largest U.S. subprime auto lender, Scopus Financial. They just delayed their earnings this week due to quote-unquote accounting matters. Normally, that's a big red flag. I think, obviously it's a big red flag. We don't know if the bubble's going to burst, in a month or 6 months or 12 months. These things are very tough to predict. But we are seeing signs, though, that from the subprime auto loan lending area that this is a problem that is developing. We've seen government warnings. State Farm auto insurance, which normally just does car insurance and the other forms of insurance. Insurance is a consistent cash flow business. It's boring but very predictable with cash flows. That's why Warren Buffett has made a lot of money in the insurance business over the long term doing that. But they're getting now into auto loans, State Farm Insurance, and they're running radio and TV commercials like crazy. I don't think, Eric, it's at the levels of, GE Cap. We were talking about this before the interview. I don't think State Farm is doing it at the levels that GE Capital was doing it at compared to their industrial business. They're somewhat boring industrial business, but, the fact that they are starting to put a lot of marketing muscle behind this, things could get bad really quick. Hello?
I'm here.
Okay, just checking if you wanted to add.
Nope.
So they had a $140 million emergency capital raise this week. So they're not publicly traded, Scopus Financial, but there's actually not a lot of ways to short subprime financial besides CarMax and some of the other used car dealerships. I was speaking with Kevin Duffy about that. He actually said there's not a lot of small little financial banks that are only subprime auto loans. He actually said that one of the best ways to do it is with CarMax. That's what he's doing, at least. And other hedge funds are using Banco Santander because besides their loan exposure to South America and emerging markets there in South America and commodity businesses, they also have been growing, subprime auto loans in Miami and the southern areas very, very rapidly as well the last few years. So we got a couple more stories before we get to Scumbag Nominees. We got the IRS investigation of the Clinton Foundation. Eric, do you think they're actually going to prosecute this? Do you think they're actually going to find anything?
Well, the IRS is not going to be releasing any major news stories or anything like that. That's for sure, and they're not going to prosecute. That's for sure. I mean, the FBI had its opportunity to prosecute, and it didn't. So that is not surprising either. And what could conceivably happen is that Clinton gets more compromised as a result of all of these ongoing investigations, and if she ever becomes president, she'll be a compromised president. I mean, the whole thing about the leaks that came through WikiLeaks being pinned on Putin is just completely laughable. The whole notion of Putin releasing these things now doesn't even make sense from an intelligence craft point of view. I mean, if the Russians had this kind of dirt on the Democratic National Committee and the efforts to sabotage Bernie Sanders and whatnot, the power that would confer was actually be something that Putin would be able to more effectively execute after a Clinton victory in the White House. I mean, it's crazy. What's going on is more just spinning of the news.
You don't think, Eric, that maybe Putin hates Hillary Clinton so much he doesn't even want to see her get to the White House? You don't think he's willing to do that and screw her over before?
Well, if you think it through, I mean, if this kind of leak came from Moscow, it would be something that would risk being provable as being leaked by Moscow, and if that was something that actually was provable, it would completely backfire on Moscow. So it doesn't make any sense. Well, and those kind of things can be proved with relative ease too. The reality is that you can follow the, trace internet packets and so forth. That the NSA can follow hackers and what they're doing, and they do that kind of thing. And this is just a cover story. It's a form of deflection. And the reality is that the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary's camp did strategizing that is unethical in the extreme, if not flat, and is, in fact, in violation of campaign laws, multiple campaign laws. And the subject is being changed to, it's all the evil fault of Senor Putin.
Or it's Trump's fault, or she just has excuses for everything. It's just unbelievable. It's a right-wing conspiracy. That's her favorite excuse normally. But yeah, there's always a foreign dictator that's causing problems.
No one's denying anything that is in the emails.
Yep. Well, I mean, they can't deny anything, right? Because they have the exact email addresses proving it was them. We had Debbie Wasserman Schultz actually step down. I have heard, though, that after Trump did his speech yesterday, talking about trying to get people to bring more information forward about the emails, that there are some Democratic congressmen now who want to try to get him in trouble with the Logan Act for trying to get foreign spying on American interests. So, I mean, it's just partisan politics as normal here. But supposedly so little people are going to the Democratic National Committee because a lot of the Bernie Sanders supporters left, that they're trying to pay people $50 a day to sit in the stands and cheer, which, by the way, is below minimum wage laws that all the Democrats want $15 an hour.
We need to staff the convention with robots. I mean, come on.
With robots? No, I don't think the unions would allow the robots. I don't think the unions would allow the robots. Although, with the United Auto Workers, they've slowly transitioned to more of an automated plants. So, I mean, there is some inevitability to do this, but I just don't see the Democrats staffing the Democratic National Committee with robots. Not when they can do pay for play and other stuff. So there was another story on against crony capitalism, where like Hillary Clinton's aides and lobbyists and the Virginia governor, who's a Democrat now, because so many Democrats are moving here to Northern Virginia to get government jobs from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Chicago, so many other areas, California, so many other areas, that they're meeting at the Palm Steakhouse once a week and spending enormous amounts, like thousands of dollars lunches and dinners and stuff for a while. But I guess that's, the American public, some people are just learning about this right now, but this has been business as normal in D.C. for a long, long time. So we have the WikiLeaks stuff with the DNC emails and voicemail leaks. We touched on this a little bit briefly. Obviously, I think Julian Assange is doing mostly a good job with this. I don't like the fact that he posted, people's social security numbers, their credit card information, their home addresses, their email addresses. Maybe he could have left that out. That would have been, a little bit preferable compared to his full data dump, what he did. But I hear, a lot of Democrats saying, he's not going to be able to release the rest of the information. He has backups. He's protected in an embassy. There's multiple backups on backups. So the information is going to get released. Now, finally, Eric, we have the Scumbag Nominees. We're not even at 40 minutes yet, so we're doing a good job. Our Scumbag Nominees, we have number one, we have the TSA. Unfortunately, I don't know if you guys have seen the story. There's a 19-year-old cancer patient who's partially deaf and has other disabilities. She was brutally assaulted by TSA because she didn't understand the TSA agents asking her to comply with certain things. I think she has brain damage from part of her chemotherapy. It's just really sad. I think there's video of even her being beaten because people took out their camera phones. And this leads us into the wider TSA scandal. Great story on the TSA on against crony capitalism from Tech Dirt originally. The TSA has been hiring consultants to try to fix things over there, but what the consultants have been finding out is that there's been an increased amount of misconduct allegations by nearly 29% in the last 3 years. But despite the fact that amount of complaints are increasing that much against the TSA by people, the amount of complaints being investigated by the TSA has actually gone down 15%. So, normally what the government bureaucrats and government agency would say is, oh, we can't investigate these things because we don't have enough people, enough money, enough resources, blah, 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 blah. That's always the normal excuse. I've heard it all the time from friends working in different government agencies here. That's not the truth, okay? There's more to this story. Let me read about it. Almost half of TSA's entire workforce has allegedly committed misconduct, and almost half of that number, so half of half, or 1/3, has done so repeatedly. So according to the data from this internal study, over 1,000 TSA employees have committed dozens of misconduct allegations many times. Have committed misconduct allegations dozens of times. So that's improper, maybe molesting someone, or maybe stealing things from someone's suitcase, or other reprehensible screw-ups from the TSA. So there's a lot of people who have TSA jobs, Eric, who don't want to work there and are committing crimes on the job that if they weren't government employees, they'd be in prison for.
Your TSA does such a horrible job that a number of airports and jurisdictions are looking at some ways of replacing them with private security. And that'll be a good thing to see. Maybe we'll get some momentum moving in that direction.
Amen. Any free market solutions to this, I am in favor of. That can lower the cost and make it easier to get in and out of the airport and still keep things pretty safe. The TSA has done a horrible job of this. And, the standard line, like I said, from Democrats and government employee workers is, oh, we didn't give the TSA enough money. Let's throw more money at the problem.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Their testing rates of how many percentage of times they can stop a gun going through their screening systems and whatnot. I mean, it's almost like 99% failure rate for at least 10 tests that I've looked at over the years. I mean, the TSA is a basket case. Not to mention the fact that they, beat up 19-year-old cancer patients and grandmothers who, are just with their colostomy bags hanging out. I mean, it's insane what the TSA does.
Yeah, and things just are getting worse there. Obviously, with the study there and the consulting group they hired, things are getting worse. There's even more misconduct from employees there, not less. So, the more they try to throw money at the problem, it seems the worse it's getting.
Yeah.
I guess that's because people are getting their brothers or sisters or cousins, friends hired that they'll vouch for them, but maybe they don't have the credentials to get hired, but because they know someone in there, they got the job. That's normally how government agencies work. It's a very crony system in terms of the hiring process and getting a government job. There are some meritocracy stuff, but a lot of it is hardcore cronyism. Okay, so let's bring up a couple more. We have the VA scandal. It's not as large as the TSA scandal, but we have $20 million that was spent on artwork at the VA hospitals that could have been spent on hiring more doctors. So, I mean, for our former veterans out there, that's just really sad. It's obviously Donald Trump has said he's going to fix this problem. I mean, there's really only nowhere to go but up, considering how bad the things are now with a lot of the VA hospitals that we've heard. The other scumbag nominee I have is Facebook. They actually blocked links to the WikiLeaks story about the DNC email hack stories and Debbie Wasserman Schultz stories that were either directly from WikiLeaks or other people covering it. I guess they use their algorithm software for a certain amount of time to block them out, so people couldn't post them and share them with friends. It's just unbelievable, Eric, this level of censorship. But a lot of these technology companies, Eric, whether it's Uber, I heard that Uber actually wouldn't give service to people at the Republican National Committee. So there are, these technology companies who have certain types of politics. These are the rich limousine liberal Democrats these guys, are picking and choosing winners you can tell who their preferences are for political purposes. And finally, before we wrap up the show, the last one is the Clinton Cash documentary. So I think this is a good documentary, guys. It just came out this week. There's a bunch of sources. You can go on YouTube and watch it. It is free. It's an hour, 4 minutes long. It goes through different levels of cronyism and corruption within the Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, and how much money they get paid by foreign governments for speeches. We've already seen the CEO of Ericsson step down. Did you see that, Eric? That he had actually stepped down as soon as he was outed in the documentary for those bribes. So we are starting to see some good things, some justice come out of this. Unfortunately, nothing's happened to Hillary Clinton yet. So I mean, she's obviously, this is disgusting. There's so many, unfortunately, brainwashed American women still that will make excuses for all the stuff Hillary Clinton's done, or say, oh, she didn't do any of the stuff you said, or oh, I didn't see it in Washington Post, or New York Times, or CNN, or MSNBC didn't say she did any of this, so I don't believe any of the other sources. I've heard that a lot. I've seen it posted on Facebook. Try to get your mother, your sister, your girlfriend, your wife, your daughter, try to get them. Unfortunately, a lot of them do want to see, no matter what, they do want to see a female president in their lifetime, and they think Hillary has the best shot, and they don't care about any of the bad things she has done. I have no problem with seeing a female president. I think there's a lot of very capable women in this country. There's a lot of great women entrepreneurs that aren't given the opportunity, but Hillary Clinton shouldn't be one of them.
Well, we should also point out that this is another example of misdirection. It's not unlike what's going on with the whole Putin's email is the reason for the scandal of the Democratic National Committee and trying to barbecue Sanders' campaign. The whole framing about this Hillary email scandal has been one of attempting to say this is a vast right-wing conspiracy with respect to Benghazi, and 4 American lives are on, and the ambassador being killed by rebels when we didn't respond to their calls for help. That is essentially even what the right wing is framing as the core of this scandal. And that's not the most important thing that people need to keep in the back of their mind. I mean, Hillary Clinton was involved with basically blowing up Libya and creating the rat line of militants and funding and weapons that went into Syria that ultimately is responsible by UN numbers for 250,000 dead Syrians and as many as 400,000 for independent studies as far as what's happened in that war theater. This woman has more blood on her hand than the majority of leaders in world history. She was an integral part of the death of 500,000 people. And people are focusing on this email scandal as if it's like, vast right-wing conspiracy, and that the sin was emails being available and the compromise to our national security that has come from that. Yes, so that is it's a paramount importance to underscore that is outright treason. There's no doubt.
Yep.
But the media is spinning this as if that's really the juxt of what Hillary's sins are. And the reality is that she's committed and has been party to policies that have resulted in genocide. So when people speak about wanting to have a woman as their first president, they're turning their back in ignorance to somebody who has been a party to genocide.
Well, they blame that on other people, Eric. I still see posts from my non-libertarian friends from college or before who are brainwashed and love Hillary Clinton, or, I was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and now for the good of the party, because, anything's better than Trump, I'm going to vote for Clinton. But I can make a good argument, Eric, that Hillary Clinton is one of the most corrupt politicians in the history of the United States. I mean, just the stuff she's done. Look if you watch the Clinton Cash documentary, you'll see how she, just for money, she sold all these uranium assets in the United States to Russian companies, without a second thought. just because she was getting a lot of money in her bank account. I think over $30 million just on that one deal alone went to the Clinton Foundation and also to Bill Clinton for speeches and also directly into her pocket. So this is a woman that, she has no real allegiances except to herself and her Clinton Foundation and her husband and her daughter, especially when she's in public office. If she wasn't in public office, it would be okay for her to be selfish and, she wouldn't harm nearly as many people. But, when she's a public servant, she's supposed to put the good of the United States first. That's one of the main things about public servants, or at least in theory it's supposed to be, but we just, in reality, in practice, we don't see that occur. So, in terms of a historical perspective, as we wrap this up, there was a lot of stuff. I wanted to talk about this on a show a long time ago. I just didn't bring it up. Warren Harding. There was a huge scandal. Go back, look through your history textbooks, Teapot Dome scandal. There was a couple unbidded leases on government lands, Department of Interior. It wasn't even Warren Harding who was involved in the corruption. There was a couple unbidded contracts for some oil leases, Department of the Interior on government lands that went to, certain oil companies. And Warren Harding, because it was one of his own cabinet members, President Warren Harding stepped down. So, and this was one scandal. Nowadays, guys, in the U.S. government at all different levels of the federal government, these unbidded contracts with bribes and lobbyists, these Teapot Dome scandals, they happen every day. And not only do they happen once a day, Eric, they probably happen a couple times an hour.
Teapot Dome was considered for 150 years to be one of the most monumental scandals of American history, and now, indeed, those kind of things happen daily.
Exactly. I wanted to put this thing in a proper historical perspective to people to understand the degree of corruption that American society, the American political system has gotten to. I could name tons of stories about whether it's the unbidded, you guys know I live in the D.C. metro area. There was an unbidded contract to build the new addition to the Tyson's Corner D.C. metro, I think $100 million unbidded contract. There was the Boston Tunnel dig. There was their freeway there that was added. There was tons of unbidded contracts there. There's just so many examples. So you really got to, if you want to understand, maybe get an idea of what is going to happen in the future, you should really start reading history books and understand, because, whether it's Trump going forward with some of these, if Trump wins the presidency, some of these crazy protectionist ideas that Trump is talking about on China, that would be comparable to the damage that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Acts did to the global economy and to the U.S. economy. Go and read, search on the Foundation for Economic Education website, search problems with Smoot-Hawley tariff and read articles about that and see. So the people who are saying, oh, Trump's raising, tariffs on China that will fix the U.S. economy, bring jobs back, et cetera, make the U.S. economy good, I would hold off on that. I would look for answers in history to see that, these tariffs, these protectionist policies, that they haven't exactly worked as planned.
Yeah.
And they normally create trade wars and other stuff.
And since we are, pontificating on Trump and what may happen going forward, I'll toss this out because I'm sure it'll be of interest to folks. I think Trump's going to win the election by a pretty significant margin. It'll be similar to the 1980s electoral college sweep, like what Reagan did. And the popular vote, probably about 5% margin as well, too. It's going to be a pretty significant win. They'll be calling it a mandate. What Trump, though, could conceivably do if we do have an economic downturn and geopolitical friction elevating and more terrorist strikes and all of these negatives that can come on the horizon, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more anti-Muslim fervor, and what's going on with Saudi Arabia as an advanced blip on my radar is disconcerting. The whole 28 pages and that theme that we hadn't addressed in this show. We can pick it up some other time if you wanted to. But, it looks like when all else fails, as to quote Gerald Celente's great phrase, when all else fails, they take us to war. And whether it's Clinton or Trump, it unfortunately looks like, despite Trump's flirtation with, the pushback against the whole Cold War 2.0 efforts of the neocons and the whole militarist theme that is very visible within the Democratic Party now, with Hillary pushing that, I don't think we're going to get out of 2017 without a lot more of a militarist kind of United States foreign policy, regardless of who's leading this country. So that definitely sucks, and it's also tied into what we were talking about before about the devolution of the American empire and how things are just kind of devolving and falling apart from systems that are, overburdened and creaking in terms of its structural integrity. It also gets back to that interview you had with Chris Martenson and all the work that he's done when it comes to complex systems. I mean, this is definitely a dystopian quagmire that we're in, and it unfortunately is getting worse. So buckle up, folks. It's going to be a pretty intense number of weeks as we move through this election and going into 2017. I think we're going to see a stock market correction that's going to get a lot of people sitting on the edge of their seats.
Bold prediction on Trump winning. I think we're going to have a close election, but, the people in power, I think they want Hillary to win so much. I mean, there's so many ways that they can rig the election. I think Hillary may just pull out a slight victory. There'll be ways for her to rig or manipulate the election. But, maybe I think it's going to be very, very close, though.
It'll be like Brexit. I think that the manipulation, we already have seen examples of massive manipulation in the primaries. In Arizona in particular, Bernie was hosed. The dipole machines, whatever. I'm not sure exactly the level at which they, swung votes, but there definitely was electronic vote manipulation going on there, and there's definitely going to be an element of that in the national election too. And the establishment definitely wants Hillary more than Trump. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. But I think, it's going to be kind of like what happened with Brexit. The amount of people that are pissed off is huge. It's under the radar to some extent, not being fully captured by the polls. Yeah. Even polls that indicate, 6% vote for Johnson, for example, libertarian presidential candidate within, the broader national polls. Well, most of those people are going to be flowing into Trump votes. They're not going to be voting for Hillary. So.
I also think, Eric, that the mainstream polls, a lot of them are, people could do damn lies with statistics. There's ways we've seen this with the economic data, with GDP, inflation numbers, CPI, and jobs numbers. There's ways to rig polls too.
I used to put together polls, and it's not hard to have leading questions that frame the way a respondent will respond. It's very easy to do, and all of the polling organizations do it.
Yep, and I was listening to the radio today when I was driving to lunch, and I heard the mainstream news radio, one of the local radio stations, saying how Hillary has a convincing 9% lead in Pennsylvania, and that, there's almost no way that Trump's going to be able to make up ground. So I think they're trying to discourage people, and, this is normal spin jobs from the mainstream media nowadays. But we're almost at an hour. Eric and I, there were other topics we could have covered, like the oil market crashing and things like that, but we'll leave that for another show and the next episode.